Welcome to Citizens for Community Media. This is Peter Helland with Robert Smith, Mario Sims, and E. Michael Jones. We do something different on this show, which the title of it is going to be something like Reexamining Mayor Pete and his years in office. But we're going to start out by showing an old clip that we just found, and it was with Robert, Mike, and I. It was December of 2012, and we had already done a show in your office, the one before, which we're still looking for that tape. But the one we did had a lot of discussion on the aftermath of Mayor Pete's firing of Chief Boykins and who he was going to pick. Okay, and what we didn't say in there is that they had a town hall meeting to decide what kind of police chief do you want, okay? And it only got to the first question, which was, do you want a police chief from South Bend or from outside the city? So a couple weeks later, they gave us the three candidates that they were going to look at, and they were all from outside the city. And
even though the people had said they wanted a local candidate.
Front page of the paper said unanimous, they want a local candidate, right. And so then we are in this 11-minute clip that we're going to watch. We're examining those three candidates, and we mentioned Teachman, who ended up getting hired. Okay, but this is going to lay a good foundation for our discussion because Mario is really good on the tapes and what's happening. In fact, something just occurred today that you're going to say.
Correct.
Okay, and then my emphasis is on, who did he replace him with? Okay, so everybody has some good emphases here.
Sure.
So let's watch this clip from December of 2012, and the show then was called Public Access Michiana, which we changed to Citizens for Community Media. Good evening, this is Public Access Michiana, and we have the same guests, Bob Smith and E. Michael Jones, as we did last week. And the scripture we read last time is still relevant to what we want to discuss tonight. So let's just refresh it. We started out with Palm Sunday. Jesus was fulfilling the prophecy, and it says, this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden. And they laid out the palms. They were excited. The Messiah had come. The fulfillment of all the Old Testament prophecies was at hand. And 1 week later, everything turned around. And here's what we read. For Pilate knew that it was out of envy that they, the religious leaders, had delivered Jesus up. And then it says, now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. And it's assumed that a large part of that crowd was present when Jesus was fulfilling the prophecy riding on the donkey. Why did they let themselves be persuaded to change their mind about Jesus? And if we're ignorant of those forces out there trying to persuade you, if you're ignorant, my people perish for lack of knowledge. The Christians are constantly, if they're being led by the Holy Spirit, we're constantly trying to persuade people of Christ. But the enemy is also out there laying out his seed and trying to persuade people away from Christ and to release, instead of Christ, that Barabbas spirit. And Mike has even written a book on that revolutionary spirit that the other side is persuading people to go to. And the relevancy of this time is that we were analyzing a police chief coming into town, and since the last show we've had something new. We had three candidates. I don't think we knew that before.
No, we didn't.
And I did a little research, and we tried to do some research. It was interesting that some of it wasn't as much on the internet as
we got three different candidates. Two of them were exactly what we feared during the last program. The one worked with the FBI and is an expert in terrorism. Has no relevance whatsoever to South Bend, Indiana. Okay, we don't have any terrorist problem here in South Bend, Indiana. The other one was of the same stripe, a guy who works for something called the Convergence Group, which is something like Blackwater.
I think it was the Emergence
Oh, I'm
Group.
sorry, Emergence Group.
Out of Washington, D.C.
Which is something like Blackwater, which is basically a mercenary operation that establishes police forces in conquered provinces like Bosnia-Herzegovina. And this man had experience setting up a police department in a conquered province. So if you're viewing South Bend as a conquered province, this is exactly the right guy, but I don't think that's the way most people view this. And so I think we were prophetic, in a sense, in predicting the type of person that was going to get nominated. No one knew, now we know. But there's even a more recent development, and apparently 2 of the 3 candidates have dropped out.
Yes. Recently, as last night on the news, it was reported that one of the 2 has dropped out. And then earlier this afternoon, there was a rumor that the second candidate has dropped out, which brings to question why did those 2 candidates make the list, and did the consulting firm call those 3 the top 3, or did someone from the mayor's office make the choice of making the 3 on the list the top 3? But facts have shown that all 3 aren't going to make it. One has definitely dropped out.
Or is it the 2 that I just mentioned?
Yes.
The black guy who was the FBI agent,
Yes.
and the guy who works for the Emergence Group. So
Yes.
that's good. Well, that's good
Yes.
news. They were the candidates we wanted least for South Bend, Indiana.
Right, and if our show last time had some kind of influence, then they could see that we were going to, not just us, but there was a potential that people weren't going to let up.
Well, the other thing is, I think that we have to point out, we mentioned social engineering the last time. Social engineering doesn't work if you know that it's social engineering. It has to be invisible. We have to believe that it's just forces of nature that are throwing these, like the black people against the Lithuanians in Chicago. It's just a force of nature. Nobody's manipulating. As soon as you realize someone's at the top manipulating it, then it doesn't work anymore.
Well,
so it may be simply because we've shown the light here on what I think the real game was. Maybe that ruined the whole operation. I don't know.
Well, the fellow from Washington, D.C. with the Emergence Group, Teachman, worked for a guy named James Kretzker or something. I can't. Krejci. Okay. Krejci is a dual citizen. He's Switzerland and the United States.
Okay.
In the 90s, he went over to Russia and helped found, the chief financial officer, helped found a major TV network system there, which now is run by one of the oligarchs, which could be like one of these Russian Jewish mafia cartel over there.
Yeah.
But this is who that Teachman works for. So the fellow that Teachman works for is got very suspicious global connections.
Well, I think these hired police forces are not in what we want here. We don't want hired mercenaries coming in and policing it. That's for conquered provinces. That's not for a people who govern themselves. So they're totally inappropriate. Whoever made the decision made a completely wrong decision, and they show their hand about what they think about South Bend, Indiana. They think of it as a conquered province that's going to have this type of commissar who's going to come in and run it. That's not what we want.
Well, we could have easily have had it, at least in their minds.
We could have.
They certainly thought that this was...
All I'm saying is whoever made this decision had all the wrong criteria, and that became apparent when they showed their hand and they showed the 3 candidates. Totally inappropriate for our situation.
And they were expecting nobody to notice.
Right. I think that was the conventional accounts. None of this came out in the conventional accounts. So it just shows you that there's a big vacuum here in terms of news and the transmission of news, and more importantly, the analysis of the news, which just doesn't happen here.
And there's a vacuum of enough men that have dedicated themselves, which every Christian should be dedicated, to analyzing things that need to be analyzed.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
if you were a pastor in a church and you went on leave for a while and you said, well, I'm going to have somebody else preaching, and he's preaching heresy, well, wouldn't you be, why did you let that happen?
Right, and also back to your scripture there, people will try to negatively influence other people just for their own envy or their personal gain. And in this case, as has been shown through history, sooner or later the truth is going to come out. But the problem is there has always got to be someone or some group there that is willing to question the decisions such that people can start thinking. And this type of selection process, it was faulty. And the candidates who were on the list were not what's needed as policemen for a city that is self-governed in a country that is self-governed. We are not at war.
Or conquered.
Right. So the reduction in the list is a good thing.
Right, and so the other fella is more acceptable. I mean,
He was the least objectionable, let's put it that way. I don't know whether he gets it by default. Do you get it by default if the other two guys, or just the whole process, is the whole process going to be called into question if two people leave before the selection takes
There's
place?
really no choice. You don't have a choice. Right? 'Cause
It was very little choice to begin with. 3 candidates, all picked by this guy from Wasserman from Martha's Vineyard. No local candidates, even though there was great public expression of or desire for a local candidate. So I think the whole process is faulty, and I think they should start all over again, rather than just give it to a guy by default simply because the other 2 guys left. That doesn't really.
But it's
That's not much of a mandate, it seems to me.
Right.
It's partly in the hands of Wasserman, or I mean, what's
It's totally in the hands of Buttigieg at this point.
But who was Wasserman?
Wasserman has total control over who the candidates are, and that's 99% of the game. So basically, it's like a political election where you have to choose between a Democrat and a Republican, and the Democrats and the Republicans generally get together and they agree that there are certain issues we are not going to address. So the one in recent memory was Clinton and Bush over NAFTA and GATT. The 2 parties were conspiring together to keep that out. No one was allowed to talk about that. It has had a horrendous effect on American manufacturing. We've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs because of it. And
Okay, I think we're on the air here. Was that helpful a little bit? Now, let me just jump in on what happened so people watching. Sure. Okay, so there was 3 candidates, 2 dropped out, and it was a little bit confusing. The truth is, Teachman
Did not drop out.
did not drop
I got
out,
that
and he was the
completely
bad
wrong.
guy, and we were kind of wrong.
We were wrong.
So they
completely
did
wrong.
hire Teachman, and Teachman lasted until, I think, about September 2015. Now, something happened then, and Bob might know a little bit about it, because in September of 2015, I went to a conference, and I think you knew about this. And this was, you had international people at this conference. And the issue was the Israelization happening in Gaza. In other words, it was a Middle East peace conference dealing with Gaza. And they were talking about how the Israelis were so mistreating the people in Gaza. Well, during this, and we had a lot of people from South Bend, you had a lot of people from the mayor's office, okay? And so I mentioned, I'm in the Martin Luther King's Club, and we're concerned about the mayor, and we're concerned about the police chief, that, not just us, but a lot of people, but about how he was imposing this Israelization upon South Bend. In other words, everybody was marveling at how they were pointing out all the evils of Israel there, and I'm saying they're considering us a conquered province. They're considering us this, and I was watching the faces of some of the people in the mayor's office, and it was like they were getting the message. 10 days later, Teachman is fired.
Right.
Okay, I don't know why he was fired. I just know from my perspective, that's what happened. And significant people from the mayor's office.
Well, let's take credit for getting him fired. Let's not beat around the bush here. We did it, fellas, because we exposed what was going on. That was toxic to that. Even though I got the guy's name wrong, I got the wrong guy, but the plan was there. You're treating South Bend like a conquered province. You mean there's nobody in South Bend who's qualified for this job? This is exactly the situation. This is Pete Buttigieg in a nutshell. Pete Buttigieg is the perfect candidate. What we need is to fire the voters of Indiana. Wait a minute, stop here. This man is supposed to represent us. He's not supposed to impose some type of oligarchic agenda on us. And we've been saying this now for 7 years now, and I think now it's finally getting national traction. Because there was an article in, first of all, he had his fundraiser in Napa Valley. 2 billionaires from Napa Valley with a dining room with a Swarovski chandelier. Bad optics. Nobody's supposed to be in there, but somebody got in there with a camera. Well, what have we been saying all along? This man is the oligarch's candidate. He is incapable. He is constitutionally incapable of representing anybody but his own ego. His life is one big resume building operation. He could not represent the people of South Bend because the litmus test was, are you on board with the homosexual agenda? If you're on board, then you're one of us. You're a great guy. I'm a grassroots guy. As soon as you object, you're no longer a citizen of South Bend, Indiana. You're a fringe activist, which is the phrase he used to describe me in his biography. Guy lives on the same street. I live on the same street with him, but I'm not going to be represented unless I go along with this agenda. The point I'm trying to make now is this is now going national. There was an article in the New York Times just yesterday saying, Pete, this is 10 years ago. This is a man who does not represent the state of the Democratic Party today. What we're seeing 10 years ago is this alliance here between the oligarchs and the homosexuals. That is the state-of-the-art ruling class arrangement in our day. It is also state-of-the-art psychological warfare against countries like Ireland, which was taken over by this combine of big corporations, tax-exempt foundations, and high-tech firms like Google. They combine, they use the homosexual as their proxy warrior, as their human shield, and they come in and they overturn your government. Well, he did it in South Bend. Yeah. And the year after he did it in South Bend, they did it in Indianapolis, where the government passes a law and then suddenly the CEOs come in and say, well, you can't discriminate against homosexuals, you have to overturn the law. That is getting out. And I think that we have to, who stood in the breach here? When everybody just fell over and played dead. Who stood there? Who was on the steps?
Yeah, it was.
We were there.
Yeah, the three of us for sure.
We were there,
yeah, exactly.
on the steps of that church,
Exactly.
calling this guy out, and this reporter says to me, how does it feel to be on the wrong side of history? Obergefell, the Supreme Court just passed Obergefell. For once in my life, I had the right comeback. I said, son, if there's one institution that's been on the wrong side of history, it's been the Supreme Court. Have you ever heard of the Dred Scott decision? And everybody laughed at that point, you know. But I mean, what we're seeing here is that the local story that we've been saying for years is now coming into national focus. This is the issue. Go ahead.
No, that's because he is now stepped onto the national stage as a presidential candidate, meaning Pete Buttigieg. And it's interesting that because you've said that all along, that what's happened is the homosexuals have replaced black people. I guess the large number of black people if you compare the number of black people, which is probably, I don't know, 24% of America or some number like that, to 4% of America is homosexual, it's 2%. It's too unwieldy. So I tell you what, let's have a minority that we create. Let's co-opt civil rights, and let's now assign it to 2% because we can control 2%.
Right.
Okay. So that's essentially what has happened. And to make it even more appetizing, let's have our candidates say he's a Christian and he's gay and God made him that way. So now you have so many immature Christians that are saying, hey, he's a Christian, what's wrong? So, but I mean, this is really an amazing time, not only in South Bend, but America. It's an amazing time in South Bend because we've seen, as he's thrust onto the stage nationally, you've seen the national media sanitizing probably one of the most damaging, potentially, and explosive problems that he have, which is the South Bend police tapes. Cliff Notes version is which ties into the police chief and Teachman coming in. When the mayor took office in January 1st of 2012, there was a black police chief. He was beloved. A lot of people loved him. Even the white officers would tell you he was firm but fair. Loved him. No problem. The community, it was one of those situations where the community and the rank and file agreed that Chief Boykins was a good chief. Well, what happened was, along about March of 2012, the director of communications for the South Bend Police Department, in her role as director of communications, maintaining the police lines, came across some recordings. In those recordings, she heard at least 4 officers discussing their plans on removing Chief Boykins because one of the major campaign supporters of Pete Buttigieg was also a campaign supporter or a financial supporter of one of the officers. In fact, he later ran for sheriff and only lost by 18 votes. But in addition to hearing them planning on getting Chief Boykins replaced, and in their words, I'm paraphrasing, wouldn't it be fun when white people control the police department again, which is what one of them said. In addition to racially disparaging other members of the South Bend Police Department who happen to be black, but they're also plotting crimes, including planting evidence on black defendants and those type of things. Mrs. DePape heard that. She then took the recordings, took it to Chief Boykins, and had him listen. Chief Boykins thinking, you have to hear this, Mayor Buttigieg. So he schedules a time to go to Mayor Buttigieg. Mayor Buttigieg decides to ask him to resign. And I think he resigned and then thought, well, I didn't do anything. He calls back the next day and says, I'm not resigning. So he's demoted from chief to captain. Buttigieg says, the reason I did it is to stave off a federal investigation, which is absurd. It's like robbing a bank and the feds come and say, you know, President Peter, your teller robbed the bank, and if you just fire her, we aren't going to prosecute her. That's the type of nonsense that Buttigieg started to disseminate. So we have the tape situation. That was 2012. Boykins is now a captain. Okay, Mrs. DePape. In fact, she was on the radio today, give the first interview nationwide. She was on for half an hour, and she explained that that what had happened was just what I said. She's in her role as the director of communications, maintaining lines. She said that we don't record people, we record lines. And said the reason the lines are recorded because sometimes citizens will call in, and then they're not happy with an officer, they'll file a complaint. Well, we can go back and listen to the tape and find out what happened. That's what that was. It was nothing sinister. She said this had been in place for a long time before Chief Boykins got there, who was blamed for the recordings. He had nothing to do with it. He was just continuing his system. In fact, she said that even after Mike Shmuel, the mayor's chief of staff, called her in, who's now the mayor's campaign chair, called her in and demanded she quit, she said, why? Why? I mean, this went on before. All I'm doing is doing my job. I thought you would like to hear what was going on. And then ultimately, Rich Hill, who was an outside private attorney, fired her, which she thought was kind of interesting, because she said, I'm fired by somebody that's not even working for the city. But make a long story short, the point that she wanted to make is that there was corruption on that tape, there was racism on that tape, and that there's absolutely no reason for the mayor not to play those tapes. Now, this is important because he has said over and over again for 7 years since 2012, I'd like to play the tapes, I'd like to know what's on the tapes, but I can't because it's against the law. What Mrs. DePape said today was, I mean, it was just, she destroyed that argument. She said, well, when the FBI concluded their investigation of the tapes to determine if there was wiretapping, which they found there was none, they gave the tapes back to the city. So if it was illegal to obtain these tapes, certainly the FBI wouldn't have given them back to the city. And furthermore, she said that during the discovery process, the city attorneys and the private attorneys from the other side, because there were suits, as you could imagine, filed, asked her what was on the tapes. Now, she said, you know, I heard racist comments and illegal activities. So what you have now is a presidential candidate who is lying to the people, saying that I can't play the tapes when there's no legal impediment to playing the tapes. Mrs. DePape, at the end of her live interview today, was asked, well, you know, the former chief executive of the city of South Bend, the mayor, Pete Buttigieg, is now running for chief executive of America as the president. Would you vote for him? And she said, and she was just so honest. She said, you know, my husband Rick and I voted for him originally. We were excited. We thought this was a breath of fresh air. But you know, after what I know happened, and he continues to say he can't play the tapes when there's no reason he can't, then I wouldn't vote for him because he has bad character. As a pastor, we've been fighting for the tapes to be played for 12 years. Not because I don't like Pete Buttigieg. When you start with scripture, I had to smile because I don't have an opinion of anyone. Whatever God says is the truth to me. So I go to Amos 7, which God uses as the plumb line, and I place a plumb line to the mayor. And the plumb line shows that not only is his character off by the lies he's told that are not supported by the law or the facts why the tapes can't be played, but also the fact that when he makes a statement that God made him this way to justify his homosexuality, when it's clear in the first book of the Bible that God made male and female, you know, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And it's that type of thing that's not only devious, it's destructive, Mike. And it's being now thrust onto the world stage.
It's destructive because you're picking and choosing the moral law.
Yes.
You're picking which commandment you're going to obey, and you're setting an example because you're the head of this city. And so that means that other people can say, well, okay, I'm just doing what Pete says. He's got that one. I don't want to follow this one. You're creating a kind of moral subversion of the entire community because of the bad example that you're giving.
Yes.
But the other point that I wanted to make was that in this time period, the article came out in the Young Turks about, it turns out that the guy who's backing, the big backer, the big cheese here, the kingmaker in St. Joseph County.
Bob Urbanski is a major funder.
Was supporting Pete to go in and take out Boykins.
And the reason was he wanted his guy, Tim Corbett, who was on the tapes and saying that, hey, our guy, Mr. Urbanski, who Tim Corbett has been disciplined for using his badge to go across state line to collect a bill from a businessman for Bob Urbanski. And the plan was for Boykins to be fired and Tim Corbett to be made police chief until this information on the tapes was exposed. Now, ultimately, Corbett ran for sheriff and almost won 2 years ago. He lost by, I think, 18 votes.
Right. But I'm interested in hearing Bob, because Bob knows almost everything. Okay.
Just to back up some, our listeners may not have the background, so I would like to give a little of the background on the demotion of Chief Boykins. Like the reason the mayor gave was that Boykins was being investigated by the FBI.
Correct.
Such that he wanted to spare Boykins from that investigation, such that if he was fired, he then would be spared. Now, this turned out to be a lie. As a matter of fact, the district attorney from Chicago sent a letter
David Capps, right?
right to the city council stating, we are not investigating Chief Boykins, you know, such that that lie was, well, it came out such that everyone knew it, you know. Now, the tapes, those lines, those are the different phone lines that people can call in. That taping system was in place
That's right.
years
That's
before Boykins was the chief.
That's correct.
Years. It was there years just before Hurley was the chief, you know. That taping system goes back more than 30 years, you know, such that to put the fault on the young lady,
Karen DePape.
Karen,
DePape, right.
who was fired, that was also wrong, you know. Now, with Teachman, who replaced Boykins, one of the things that he was known for was to separate people as though they were in a conquered country. Physically separate them and to physically punish them. Something Teachman did as he visited the African American churches and other groups was to take with him chains.
Shackles, right.
Shackles,
Right.
you know.
Exactly.
Shackles used to shackle a person's legs, arms, and waist. Not small shackles, but huge shackles. And he told the audience at each place, this is what you will wear if you don't get in line. Now, that's simply threatening people. That is just what Mike has been saying here, you know. I'm sorry. Our friend, Mr. Jones, has been saying here, you know. So Teachman also helped to bring in something called Shot Spotter, which is a system that will automatically give location of where a gunshot has been heard. That way, no one has to call 911. The police come to that location. And now, Teachman, when he resigned, that's the company that he went to work for, such that a person could conclude that he was already working for them as the $600,000 Shot Spotter system was installed here. Now, he should have been just investigated before he left, you know, but he wasn't, you know. So during the time that Pete was mayor, there was lots of construction in the city, lots of business, just investment, but we have some negative things that happen. The demotion of Chief Boykins, the firing of Karen, and also some activities that just did not sit right with people. And then the politics of it, if you're for him, you think it's great. If you're against him, like you think it's bad. But using the plumb line, this example, you have to look at the facts. and then work with the facts. Now, homelessness and people looking for jobs, those are still the #1 items here in South Bend. What has been done to help people who are homeless? What has been done to find people jobs? Now, low-level entry service jobs, those are plentiful. Middle-level management jobs or high-paying technical jobs, they're out there also, but the African American population is not benefiting from those. Also, other parts of the population is not benefiting from those either, you know. So the question is why? Because many people come from out of town in order to take those jobs. If you look at the housing that has been developed, a developer by the name of Dave Matthews has built many units of expensive apartments and condos. Who can afford to live there, you know? It's not people who live in South Bend. It is people coming from out of town, such that the positions are there for people to get, but they are not getting those jobs, you know.
Bob, you look at 36% black poverty.
Yeah.
So a little over a third of your black population, and this is supposed to be a progressive Democrat, Pete Buttigieg. 24% black unemployment. You're talking about homelessness. Dave Matthews, the city every year seems to be shocked and surprised that there's winter. And so what happens along about August, September, there's this discussion of what are we going to do with the homeless? Where are we going to hold what's called weather amnesty, which is open from 8 o'clock at night until 8 in the morning. And it's limited to how many beds. Let's say it's 30 female beds and 30 male beds. There are many more. Our church has, for the last 6 years, have specifically housed and dealt with, fed, clothed, and ministered to the homeless. So the thing that you can only have 60 beds at night, okay, is just, it's ridiculous. But anyway, so every year, along about August or September, there's this discussion in the city council. We need to house the homeless at weather amnesty. Where are we going to put them at? Last year, Dave Matthews was paid over $120,000 to use a small part of a factory that he had, or a warehouse that he had. Not the whole warehouse, but 2 or 3 rooms in a warehouse that limited the capacity to 30 men, 30 women. Weather amnesty is supposed to be ready November 1st because it starts getting cold then. It wasn't ready until December 1st because of some permit issues that they have. So for 30 days, you have people pitching tents. Weather amnesty then, Dave Matthews was paid over $100,000 for, it was supposed to start November. The building wasn't open until the end of November, beginning of December. It was supposed to remain open April 15th. April 1st, it closed for cleaning for 2 weeks. So he gets paid. But here's the thing. Every year this happens where a favorite son organization or a crony of the mayor surfaces and says, you can use my facility. The city gives him $100,000 more for 4 or 5 months. And then it reverts back to the owner's control. Okay. And then the city, the next year, August, September, what are we going to do with the homeless?
No permanent plan.
What?
In addition, Ivy Tech had
The trailers.
6 trailers that were in good shape that they donated to the city. The plans were to make those just available for homeless people and to put beds in there and to have running water. Those trailers have sat for so long that the city now has to basically scrap them, and it's going to cost them more than $30,000 just to scrap them, such that they could have been put to good use for the homeless. Now these are 6 double-wide trailers.
They were used for classrooms.
Right, such that they were, well, an opportunity was missed, but I think Mike was on a good track about how the position of people and their beliefs affect the way they govern. It's because you can look at how foreign countries have been impacted. Now,
Yes.
the
Yes.
fundraiser you mentioned, that was
Yesterday in Napa
the
Valley.
last fundraiser that Pete had. Now, he has had others, but the last one, it was so extravagant that it did make nearly every newspaper in this country. Now, they didn't have all the pictures, some only had the words, but you have to look at where his support is coming from.
You get the impression that there's a caste system.
This is exactly what we need to address. If this man arrives here and he announces that he's a homosexual, he is creating what we would call homosexual privilege.
Right.
Okay, you don't have to be a homosexual to have homosexual privilege. It helps. Okay, but you have to be part of this progressive cadre, and this city becomes then a magnet that draws in these people from someplace else, and they get put in positions of power, and then the local people become second-class citizens. This is the end of representative government. It is not just happening here. This is a worldwide phenomenon. Exactly the same thing happened in Ireland over a period of about 10 years, beginning with the big transnational corporations come in, a lot of them pharmaceutical firms, okay? They bring in tax-exempt foundations. The tax-exempt foundations create NGOs that start creating armies, militias of basically militant homosexuals, Antifa, whatever you want to call them, people that can be mobilized like that because of the internet. And then you bring in Google and big tech technologies, and you put all these groups together, and they have basically conquered Ireland. They have conquered a country. Not one shot was fired. It was all state-of-the-art information technology that basically turned the Irish people into second-class citizens in their own country. This is exactly what happened in Indiana. It's exactly what happens when you, in a place like South Bend, when you bring in some representative of the oligarch system. You bring him in, he's disguising you or using this whole homosexual thing as a camouflage for the fact that these people are taking over your city,
Yeah.
They're putting their people in charge of your city, and you're becoming a second-class citizen here.
You know, I saw it play out with RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, when Mike Pence, now Vice President but Governor, I happened to be down at the city capitol in Indianapolis. I went in his office and prayed for him. There was so much pressure placed on Mike Pence. When I went to his office, there must have been 70 to 80 cameras from all over the world. This is where you had the large corporate presidents flying in.
That's right.
And saying, drop it.
Salesforce.
Right, exactly.
Stop McCorkle.
And essentially strangle, the flow of capital into Indianapolis, into Indiana also, because Mike Pence had dared to speak on behalf of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA, and he killed it. And I remember seeing Mike Pence literally in tears as I prayed for him. And if you remember, his knees buckled, and I could tell you that I went down there as a representative of the Indiana's Pastors Alliance, and they were just livid at Mike Pence. We kept saying, "We'll stand with you, we'll stand with you," and he just buckled. And we saw then these corporate presidents were flying in. They weren't even residents of the state of
No.
Indiana, but they changed the course of legislation in Indiana.
They overthrew the government.
That's exactly it.
They so if Pence, I mean, okay, we all, it's easy with hindsight. We can all be Monday morning quarterbacks. But all Mike Pence had to say to Scott McCorkle was, "What part of Indiana do you come from?"
Right.
Oh, you're from California. Who elected? What office do you? Oh, you weren't elected to office. So you're not elected to any office. You don't come from Indiana, and you're telling me I have to overturn the decision that was ratified by the elected officials of the state of Indiana. Arrest this man. Officer, arrest this man. He's overthrowing the government. And do you know what happened after that? They handed the bill over to the guy, I forget his name, who was former mayor of Indianapolis, who was now working for Eli Lilly. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. You mean the big corporations have succeeded representative government? They're the people who make the laws now.
And that's Pete Buttigieg. That is exactly who he represents. I talk to reporters. I've talked to a lot of reporters, and what I always tell them is South Bend is like the movie Hunger Games. There's certain areas that if you're within the walled city of South Bend, you have those jobs, the high-paying jobs. You have all the nice Starbucks that you can go to. You have the disco lights that you enjoy. Mike calls them disco lights.
The gay disco.
The gay disco lights. One of the things he did was lit up the bridge over the river. Who thought that was an improvement? But the reality is these things were done to benefit the upper class, where the caste system is firmly in place. $1.7 billion in public works projects that were done. There are no black construction contractors. So if you want to address the 36% poverty and the 24% double-digit black unemployment, you would think, well, you want to certainly be able to give some of this money to black contractors who can then turn around and employ minorities. But you also have a school system that allows you to play football and baseball and sports with a 1.6 grade average. So it's telling you we have this caste system. It's okay.
And the black people have been replaced by a new revolutionary avant-garde, and that is the homosexual.
Who don't care for the black people at all.
So you're
leave them freezing in the street.
But one thing I like, what Bob was saying, who was referencing Mike, that Buttigieg is acting on what he believes. Okay? So what do I believe about what he believes? Well, he's number one in his class at St. Joe High School, which unfortunately, I believe he was taught evolution. And he went to Harvard, and I know he was taught radical evolution there. And the black...
And Stanley Clark, I understand he went to Stanley Clark, was a private school, and learned...
Before he went to St. Joe.
Before he went to St. Joe.
And that wouldn't have been Christian.
Well, it's as Mike said. Mike said that he's the kid that sat in the window during the summer. He never interacted with the lower class people.
I'm on that block.
Yeah, I know, and
I have 5 kids.
And two of your sons went to Harvard.
No, one son,
went
the oldest son went to Harvard. He said in his book, I was really interested in Harvard. I'm a local guy. Well, Pete, my son went to Harvard before you went. He lived 4 houses down from where you lived. Why didn't you make contact with him? The answer is very simple. He was not allowed to, because his father didn't want his son contaminated by associating with people like my children. And so as a result, he spent a lot of time, it's in the book, at the dinner table talking with the radical professors at Notre Dame, who were students of Antonio Gramsci, who was a communist, Michel Foucault, and these were the people, state-of-the-art philosophers of revolution. They were the ones who explained how you can take over a conservative society from within, like Italy or like Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And that's what his father did. And so he learned that lesson, and now he's applying it to South Bend.
We had, before you got here, and I know when I mentioned Gunnar Myrdal before, you were saying that book was ghostwritten, and I want to say that, but what he wrote, you got to understand that I think Pete Buttigieg understands it, particularly because what he's done is he's trying to co-opt black support by going right after people he designates as black leaders. Not that are popularly designated as black leaders, but he'll come and say, okay, you're the black leader. And so when the media, this is a black leader, No one ever said he's a black. And you know, to have an elected official, one of the city council people, and that's an interesting thing. You got one city council person that's going around the country supporting him, but in his 8 years, there were five black city council people. 4 of them won't support him. So 80% of the black city council people on his tenure don't support him. One person does. But the point is, if you look at the American Dilemma, it talked about how the dynamics of the black community. There are no high-paying jobs here. So what you do is you handpick, 2 or 3 black leaders. You elevate them, even if they're not qualified. You give them a high-paying job, and so you have people say, "I want a high-paying job." Well, you don't have to earn it. All you have to do is go tell the other peons that I'm really good to black people. And that's why it doesn't move the meter nationwide. Because other people look at that and they go, well, we've seen that in the American Dilemma with, Gunnar Myrdal, that's what you're doing. He's sitting down with Reverend Sharpton having a chicken dinner with the hot sauce visible, and then later on a 40-ounce in a paper bag is...
That was.
But who would do that but an oligarch? Who would do that but a kid who sat in the window? Anyone who played outside understand that you don't connect with people that way. But that is an oligarch. You have a caste system that is set up here. And he doesn't have to show care and concern. As a pastor, that's what my concern is. I see the moral damage that he's doing to lower class, black, white, Hispanic people in this city. I see it on a regular basis. I see people come in that have frostbitten fingers because they have no place to go. We fed last year from December 3rd to April 15th, 4,000 hot meals. We have a small poor church.
You know how he dealt with this when he held his launch of his national campaign and the press conference down there. He rounded up the homeless people. They were under that bridge there, national media is coming into town to get to that place, that factory that with the leaky roof. Yeah. They had to go right under that bridge. Well, there were all these homeless people inside. He rounded them up.
He cleaned it up. He had code enforcement police come in.
This was his solution to the homeless problem. Round them up.
Smash their stuff and dump it in a dumpster.
But what I see, the solution is what I see, I think you said it on the show there, the clip, is that one way to, discipline, let's take school is an easy one. If you have Christians in the school working, ministering, maybe subtly or ministry, well, you don't need the police, okay? But once you remove the Christian out, guess what? You got to put police in.
The Constitution, John Adams said, our Constitution demands a moral people. In other words, you cannot have self-government unless you can govern yourself. Yeah. And what you're saying is that you are not governing. You've given in to these demonic homosexual passions. You brag about them, and then you expect everyone else to pay their taxes and park on the right side of the street when you're violating one of the most fundamental principles of the natural law. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
But what he does is try and co-opt the scriptures to make it seem like, well, I'm a Christian and God made me this way. Which is when you talk about Christians, so now you have the, as Paul said, the Christians that are still on milk saying, well, he's a Christian. And I saw some comment on Facebook, God bless Mayor Buttigieg. And I thought, well, God doesn't bless sin.
Well, you can't leave the show without at least saying that St. Paul said, if anybody says he's a brother or a Christian, and yet is living a sexually immoral life, he said, you cannot have company with them, and you're not even allowed to eat with them.
I think when he said that, he gave that little speech about God made me this way, and it posted on YouTube, and the first comment is, don't blame God, you faggot.
Yeah, I know.
And then Chasten does something similar, and all the comments are disabled.
Yeah.
So this was the voice of the people protesting against his abuse of Scripture. We have to bring ourselves back to reality here state the fact that not one vote has been cast. Yeah. And what we're seeing here is the media and the oligarchs pushing people aside, like Tulsi Gabbard just got pushed out of the whole thing because she's not saying, and then this man with all of his money is being promoted as the man we're supposed to choose. Guess what? It's exactly what happened with the police chief in South Bend.
Yeah.
Okay? They gave us 3 candidates from completely out of this city and saying, oh, you're free to choose. The same thing has happened with the Democratic primary. They're telling us who we have to choose, and they're naming the front runners according to their criteria and the money that they're raising. Not one vote. This is an attack on representative government once again.
Yeah, no, that's another point that we didn't talk about, how much influence the media has, you know.
Well, he silenced the media here. The media here is effectively censored. It's effectively censored.
Well, what were you saying?
Yeah, but the national media has set the tone.
Yeah.
And as Mike has said, they're, like when you play a game as an adult, you can stack the deck. You can make the odds in your favor.
Sure.
You can put up 2 or 3 candidates that you know no one wants.
Right.
And you have an unqualified person who will be the only one left, who's the one that you're really pushing, which is what happened with Teachman, you know, there, you know. That's how he came here. To our viewers, like it may appear that we're bashing Mayor Pete. We are not bashing Mayor Pete. We are bringing out some facts. Absolutely. And these facts are something that the voters have to consider when they go to the polls. Amen. So
well said, brother.
just so listen to your conscience, be well-founded in your facts, and Peter's going to give us some closing remarks.
Closing remarks. I'm thinking, on the other hand, I do thank Mayor Pete because he's the one that enabled us to put the vote in to have public access. Okay, so weigh the facts, like Bob says, and these things are important. So this is Peter Helland with Dr. Jones, Mario Sims, and Dr. Smith on Citizens for Community Media.
God bless.